Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, in our funky new location. It's a little windy, but I don't think it'll be a big deal. I think somehow where I am, the concussion on the mic is so light that you don't get a big disturbance. So today's episode is going to be about the lost history that is seemingly being rediscovered. And it's one of those kind of cool situations where it's been rediscovered in a way that it's been in front of our face the entire time, and we didn't notice. It is something that the internet provides the capability of us to recognize because people who are figuring it out can share it. And then the scrutinizing happens. Meaning if someone's pulling a scam, there'll be a million people who figure it out eventually, and it's quick and it's precise. So that's a beautiful thing. This started for me with a buddy of mine starting to look at old buildings, pictures of old buildings, and YouTube videos that have this sort of collection of buildings. Now, some of you may be familiar with this. For those of you who aren't, we're going to go through it. It's going to be fun. Now, you've seen old buildings your entire life, right? Pictures of, if you're in Europe, well, you just live around them. If you're in the United States, we don't have that many buildings that are terribly old unless you're in New England. But you definitely have the ability to watch TV, look at the internet, travel. And you've seen these really ancient buildings. I mean, when I was in England last time, I remember pointing at some apartment complexes, and the guy that was driving me around said, "Oh yeah, those are about 450 years old." They were active, modern apartment complexes that had been retrofitted a couple times. His point of mentioning their age was that they had been preserved by the country. And those buildings were not insanely built. I mean, obviously they were at some fundamental level, but they're not like the buildings in Paris. They're not like all the buildings at all the world fairs that we see. But the mystery starts where you have incredibly gothic, amazing buildings. Some of them, if you're an architect, you will notice that there's definitely some cookie cutter blueprints out there where they build that type of building multiple times because it works. But it's the fact that these buildings were built all around the world, in areas of the world where the natives have no claim to that architecture. You will have these, and they're huge buildings with doors that are 20, 30, sometimes 40 feet tall. Ridiculously large doors. And we're like, okay, where's the people that live here? Windows that are gigantic, right? Now, there is a theory that, we built Gothic, gigantic buildings to scare away the people that would come and try to invade. So imagine you go to have a conversation with a king, and the doors are 30 feet tall, and someone is insinuating in their brain immediately that, well, the king must be so gigantic that it's like a mental weapon. I don't know. We know that giants existed. However, even at the highest heights that I was able to find in the old articles, I think 12 to 15 feet would have been the tallest ones that I had ever heard of. Now, you hear online all the time, 25 footers and that kind of thing. Hey, I'm open to everything, but I wasn't able to find any articles. But I found dozens and dozens of articles of, 7 to 12 foot tall beings everywhere, with an occasional claim for a 15 footer. But as soon as photography was available this last time, right? I say that because it could have been available in the past. Can you imagine that? We started taking photographs, and these buildings started getting preserved. And we're talking about, mid to late 1800s, where in Shanghai or in deep Argentina, deep Brazil, you have to understand, South America, North America, when discovered, according to recorded history, and according to all the artifacts that we find, they didn't have the wheel. And that could be two things. They lacked the mental capability of understanding the wheel, which is hard to believe. Or two, they figured out a way to get everything done without them. which could also be the case because there's tons of pyramids all over this place. How do you build a pyramid without having a wheel? And if you can master electromagnetic waves to reduce the weight of a rock by aligning its atoms into a quantum locking situation where ether goes through the rock instead of hitting the rock, well, I'm pretty sure you understand the wheel. Plus, just round rocks occur. So all these anomalies, all these little things. But these buildings are all over, technically speaking, the primitive areas of the world. But they're already there by the 1800s. They are big, and they are built to last. Now, some people might go, well, they just, they built them and then they were falling apart. Okay, maybe. I doubt it. I doubt it because architecture tends to get better and better and better with time, right? The Parthenon still exists. Plenty of pyramids still exist. Plenty of ancient structures still exist. Go to Rome. You got colosseums and theaters that were built pretty much around the time of Christ. Titus Flavius, right? They're still there. Had a little crumbled, but these buildings don't exist anymore. As if they were a danger to the record of don't let anybody know that these were here. The thing that's always frustrated me with the history that I've learned is that they always seem to want us to believe that anything that was amazing was just yesterday. Just yesterday, all this stuff happened. Okay. When they don't really have the means of predicting when Peru was drawing in the desert illustrations that can only be seen with a hot air balloon or a spacecraft. They have no idea. How were they drawn? Well, there's gigantic highways with rocks in them that color the ground, or they just simply remove the rocks and expose the earth. And even with all the rain and erosion, these things were so profoundly created that they continued to exist. Giant straight lines over, in some cases, very hostile terrain in terms of desert terrain that's very rocky and up and down. What survey equipment did they have to get that right? Was it that one guy could really walk a straight line? And then, even if one person was the genius constructing anything that you've ever seen in history, it takes a tremendous amount of people to execute. And so you have to train those that help you. And if you train them, there's only so much you can get done with word of mouth. And then if you have so many pyramids in Egypt that you're now spanning over millennia, over and over and over, well, then you have to write it down. Because word of mouth is going to deteriorate. You're going to have a famine at one point or a plague, and you're going to lose all your scientists. There's going to be an accident or something. You have to have it written down, but we don't have any hieroglyphs that talk about building pyramids. In fact, we don't have any hieroglyphs that even mention the pyramid's existence. And yet those are the people that supposedly built them. So either they came before the pyramids, which is quite possible, or for whatever reason, the pyramids were so trivial to their existence, they didn't think to mention them once, which is almost categorically impossible to believe, right? So these photos are amassing, and they kind of go in two different categories, with just the clinical discovery of buildings that were built a long time ago to amazing levels. You have the buildings that were found inside photographs, meaning as soon as cameras were capable of taking a photograph, these buildings were discovered, and they're discovered in the most bizarre places. And they're identical across continents. So it most definitely calls out to the fact that whoever built them in Europe built them in Peru, built them in Brazil, built them in clear over on the east of China. Now, China having an interesting building isn't terribly difficult to believe because there was so much opium traffic there. You would think an aristocrat would want to have a nice building there. And there's a lot of traffic and sort of Anglo-Saxon people that could have contributed to the construction. You don't have to even teach the locals how to do it. That's conceivable, right? But when you're talking about Argentina, Peru, Brazil, anything on the South American continent, Well, now you're talking about having to account for civilizations helping you out. Otherwise, you're going to have to account for, in history, bringing a ton of folks over to get these things constructed. Now, I know that it's impulsive to say, well, that's just, Christopher Columbus and the boys coming over, right? Okay. So Christopher Columbus's official story is 1492. He gets here. We don't start doing major lifting in the area for probably at least 150, 200 years in terms of this kind of construction. Yeah, there's a mission here, a mission there. Those are very clay hut, Three Amigos buildings, right? The buildings we're talking about are made of marble. 4 or 5 story buildings. Again, doors that are 15, 20, 30 feet tall. Metal. Iron. Stones, again. In classic history of Europe, a building of that caliber of construction lasts half a millennia, if not a millennia, okay? It simply does. When we look at the buildings in these photographs, that again match other buildings all around the world, some of which in different parts of the world are doing much better. We see the patina on the rocks. We see the front marble having fallen off. Now again, someone could say, well, we built it and then we abandoned it. Well, someone there is taking a photograph of it. And coincidentally, in terms of a interesting measurement of scale, always in the bottom left, very often in the bottom left, are 2 gentlemen in suits standing there, posing for the photograph, giving you the scale of the building. And what's strange is, imagine a 4-story building in modern times. It's about 50 feet tall. Well, this will be a 4-story building, but looks like it's 100 feet tall. Why? Because every story is massive inside. Like every story's got a 20-foot ceiling, so it's almost double the height. It doesn't look like my high school. It's 3 stories high. It should probably be about a little over 35, 40 feet tall. So again, the first category is just finding these really in remote locations. The second half of the photography is that they are often attributed to world fairs. They're building small cities to introduce a world fair. And I used to think, okay, when I'd see these as a kid, you have almost like an amusement park thing, some sort of Walt Disney Tomorrowland thing. And I could understand why those things would be taken down. Some of them are little eyesores after 50 years goes by. Okay. Plus, it's a lot of real estate. Now, I didn't realize that a lot of these world fairs have built literally cities that look like Paris. I say Paris because of the style of building. More of the central city area and not the outer rural areas, which might look like an Italian winery or something. But the downtown, super gothic, super amazing, domed, capped rook towers in the corners. Ornate as ornate can be. And so you have these photographs, and you look at it, and you're like, oh my God, why would they tear any of this down? Just flip it into a city. No, they tear them down. A lot of times they tear them down, and there's nothing there to this day. So why did you tear it down? You weren't going to develop the land. Turn it into a museum, turn it into a library, turn it into something interesting. I don't know, technically speaking, personally right now, what are in each one of the buildings that I've seen that were torn down. There could be some argument that they were facades, like some Hollywood set. But we sure were amazing builders back in those days. We could sure put those things up quickly. So it speaks to this lost history. People keep talking about mud floods as being sort of the catalyst for some of the destruction of these buildings. However, when we go back to these locations and take photographs, the land is still almost identical. There's no flooding there. Now, city being built on top of city, on top of city, on top of city. That's fascinating to me. It's not, I would say, amazing that you would find 1-story buildings below a city above, but 2, 3, 4. And when the architecture below continues to mirror the architecture above. That is a huge thing. So now, what if you were in New York City and you start digging down and you start finding primitive structures? You start finding, like Fred Flintstone type bedrock homes. Then your brain goes, okay, that makes sense. It's an evolution of our ability to construct architecture. But when Venice looks like Venice down below, when England looks like England down below, you start asking questions. In some cases, a lot of the sedimentary flooding that seems to have occurred in certain areas, it doesn't have any natural formations that would call out to that, meaning the city's not in a valley that would drain into the center. The other thing is that in Greece, you have the plateaus that the Parthenon is built on, what have you, having other structures underneath, and they're basically giant mountains, which seem to have things underneath. Again, not in all cases is that a mind-blowing thing. But all you need is a couple. And then all of a sudden, you're starting to think about the world a little bit differently. And how old are we on this planet, right? Or plane of existence for some of you. Brian Forrester, the gentleman that was fundamental in catalyzing my two sort of ancient history, ancient architecture episodes, part 1 and 2, he is still moving full force. And the dude is cool because he just doesn't stop. He keeps finding interesting things to report, and it's not some clickbaity thing. He really is chasing an area of history where we're all kind of like, oh yeah, that is weird, right? Now, there's a whole area of the elongated skulls, whole area of research on that. And I have been in smoke lounges where I used to have a gentleman that worked as a longshoreman. He used to come and smoke with us, and he's natively from Africa. And he said, he goes, hey, the elongated skull thing is no big deal. People strap their skulls, and he named the tribe, which apparently he might have been related to. I can't remember how he was talking about, but he knew everything about it, and he would bring it up on our telephones, and he's absolutely right. Humans used to strap their skulls to make them elongate. Now, that's only stage 1 of the thinking, because stage 2 has to do with the fact that were they simply doing that to emulate another race that was here on Earth? And Brian Forrester absolutely figured out the fact that we had a different species of humanoids on this planet in South America where they have those native cone rounded skulls. How do we know this? Well, we can see when the deformation of a skull occurs with the strapping technique. We can tell. But the smoking gun of this whole theory of those skulls being very real, outside of the fact that the bone structure is almost completely different, the eye sockets are 30 to 50% larger, which is just really wild. When they did the clay version of the skull, they didn't account for the fact the eyes were bigger. They kept putting humanoid-sized eyes in the eye sockets, which I think is very juvenile-minded scientists who can't accept the fact that they might have had much bigger eyes. But the smoking gun is the fact that the pathway where the brainstem goes up into the skull, name escapes me at the moment, is set way back inside the skull. And they're all this way. No matter how old the skull is, they've got a 16-year-old female up to some 70-year-old male. Because the skull is tilted back and has this different shape, the brainstem connects further back in the skull, unanimously across these bones. Genetic defects would not become habitually in every single one of these skulls that they find. Plus, there's a certain joint between the plates in the skull. And this particular skull has little tiny microplates where these little fissures come together that the normal human skull does not have. That's actually phenomenal. If you really think about it, And especially if you're open to the notion of us being dropped off. From where, who knows? We like to think about it, being some Star Trek-y thing. But again, if we're in this round dish, but outside that dish are other dishes or other orbits of the dish with other continents out there, and they're simply having a good time experimenting on us in the center, like some Dark City episode, then, again, there's different versions of us that are dropped off to see how well they do. Apparently, for whatever reason, the giants are gone, the pygmies are gone, and pretty much every variation of the human form in the area of completely different bone structures are gone as well. Now, for those who believe in, Yeti, Bigfoot, again, you've got some proving to do, And again, someone would have found a completely intact Bigfoot. The idea that these things exist in the hundreds, they would have to exist literally in the thousands to be a thriving species on this planet. And to not have one get hit on the head, pass out due to old age, and just we find the body, right? Just the fact that that's never occurred. It's like, maybe, unless you're selling, some Bigfoot backpacks, maybe that your time would be better spent doing other things, especially if you're clever. But isn't it interesting, the timing of this whole thing? There is almost a celestial awakening going on this planet right now, right? I mean, people are waking up all over the place. A friend of mine travels, and she was telling me, that her relatives who have never, ever had a controversial thought are now telling her all about conspiracies and how true they are, and how they always come true. And so it's interesting to say, if we were to wake up the world, it has to start somewhere, doesn't it? We have to start seeing some of the things that are like a lot of the conspiracies of the world, which is, Lee Harvey Oswald taking that shot doesn't exist when the car has been shot from a million different directions, when the car that Kennedy was in actually stops for almost 11 seconds, and all that footage has been cut out of the evidence, right? They start to lose their smoking gun, and we start to smell the smoke of their theories burning up, right? Now I'm going to review, just real quickly, some of the mechanisms that have been installed inside your mind so that you poo-poo away alternate theories, when the evidence that they are using to create these theories in your mind are almost negligible. In no particular order, the Ice Age. The Ice Age is something that is pushed on you like crazy so that you give up on attempting to understand man's history. The evidence of ice ages, well, they look at glaciers eroding mountainsides, and then when they look at mountains, they see similar erosion, and they say, see, there used to be glaciers here. They find these giant rocks and boulders that are ground underneath glaciers, and they don't attempt to find those rocks in any other manner. And so every time they find them, they simply say they were all created under glaciers. Okay. The idea that maybe a long time ago, every single piece of land on Earth at one point was in some sort of cold environment, and that these glaciers existed and then went away, but it was like maybe, millions and millions of years ago. Could be that these rocks are made in a million different ways, right? So, the proof submitted for you to give up on all of your history and to think that man has only existed on here for like a little blip. Don't give up so quickly. Paleontology. Dinosaurs. Well, I'm utterly convinced that those things never existed. The two researchers who invented the entire scientific theory ended up being the biggest fraudsters on planet Earth. Again, they said that they had discovered, 136 different species of dinosaurs, only 32 of which were kept after their scam was over. What you see dug up are usually mammoth bones, which is just a big old elephant. But when you see dinosaurs and that kind of thing, pay attention to what you think you're seeing. They're heavily guarded. They seem to know where they are before they dig them up, meaning you bury something first. There's a Canadian company and a Chinese company that are literally paid to fake dinosaur bones, and they have services. Well, they will come onto your land, bury them somewhere, and you go off on some hunt to dig them out. It's a super cool little idea, but it's not a real being. Biblically, you were taught to think that man is only about 4,500 years old. And that one comes with even more sort of resistance than the scientific ones. Because the individuals toting that become very righteous in the eyes of God, sort of thing. As if God would punish you for simply being suspicious with the brain that he gave you to be smart. I think he's created an amazing, elaborate episode of Westworld, and it is not some simple thing. It's fun. It's cool, man, to find out the fingerprints of God, right? The other one is the Big Bang. The Big Bang Theory goes against all categorically true science about gravity. Remember, the gravity definition in Wikipedia says the word phenomenon because they cannot prove their stupid theory. What it really is ethereal pressures pushing on every object in the galaxy, in the solar system, the same way that bubbles are pushed on in your nearest glass of soda water. There is not two books of physics. There's only one book of physics. Everything's water. Everything's liquid at its most fundamental state. Your illusion that something is not a liquid or a gas is simply because the orbits get so tight that you're able to touch things. Okay? And I know that the diehard flat earthers, what's funny about it is they'll piss and moan. I mean, I love you guys, but you'll piss and moan that what I'm saying is not true. But then you want to believe that there's a bubble that we live in with water above the bubble. That the moon and the the moon and the sun orbit within this pressure system within the bubble. What you do is you completely prove the ethereal sciences of thermodynamics and liquid dynamics, and then you reject the model to get your proof. It ain't turtles all the way down, people. There's something amazing going on. I'm sure it's complex in one regard and very fundamentally simple in other regards. So, try not to just sit down in your flat earth chair and go, that's it. That's all I need to know. I don't want to think about anything else. Because those who want to destroy you think about all this stuff all the time. Do I feel like I'm moving on a ball? Hell no. Can I explain a plane that flies from London to Cairo, gaining probably anywhere from 500 to 700 miles per hour going south? Absolutely not. Doesn't make any sense to me at all. When a volcano blasts a giant spout of dust in the sky in an atmosphere that is supposed to be moving at a variable rate from 1,000 miles per hour at the equator to 0 at the top, why isn't that plume immediately loosening up from its forward momentum and going backwards? Sure seems flat to me too. It does. But again, I think we're in some sort of matrix that has had several stages inserted on top of it. The other one that I've noticed come around a couple times, which I've never mentioned, is this fear-mongering theory that the sun is going to supernova. That can be given up as well. Okay? The ecosystem of a sun, I almost think it is whatever size it is, it simply grows over time. But it's probably very slow as it vacuums in more ether into its guts. But if the moon is a burned out sun, then there would be some sort of expiration to it, which doesn't make any sense to me scientifically, but then again, I can't explain why the moon is the exact same size as the sun in space, why it has craters all over it and not meteorite impacts. So I just wanted to go over there a little bit in that theory to loosen up your brain, to lubricate anything that has you anchored in your mind to deny the fact that we have this history right underneath our nose. Because think about it. someone trying to conceive of the Big Bang where all physics disappears seconds before it ever occurs, especially with the crappy physics that we have. So it's that philosophy doesn't work at all. That theory doesn't work at all. Okay. But the architecture that we have on the ground today is right in front of us. You can go see the pyramids. You can go see aqueducts and all kinds of amazing architecture, archways that are 700 years old. But again, all the years that they've ever told us that things are probably bunk. We used to have the theory that it was like, oh, well, whoever was telling us how old something was, their heart was in the right place. The technology may not serve them well. And then you read about the Smithsonian and you're like, oh, no, these people never wanted us to know anything. If you're alive today, then you are definitely centuries inside of the deception bubbles of these organizations that tell you one thing is true or false. Like I said in my Giant Pygmy episode, the Smithsonian was funded by a guy who was a good dude. They stole all of his money. He builds the place under the pretense of exposing the truth of the world, etc., etc. Then he mysteriously dies, wills it off to his nephew, I believe, and then the nephew it's just got a big target on his back. He dies. So they just raped this guy's bank account to make an organization that does nothing but deceive. And because we all struggle with this, we struggle with mentioning things that we know aren't true. I still have people telling me they caught COVID. But they'll lecture me, 15 minutes later with the fact that PCR tests don't work. Right? So if you don't believe the tests work, then stop telling me that you think people actually have it. But we do it all the time. And I think it's almost out of it's a double-tiered situation. One, people want to be right. But the other one that's the lesser one if you're a truther, because it's involuntary. It's from habits that we built up. But the second one is we are trying to keep our foot on something, right? It's like when you, if you've ever come down off of a roof, like Deckard climbing down off a building edge, you look down to see where you think a ledge might be. But then as soon as you have to look back up and make sure your hands are hanging onto the edge so you don't fall off and die, your foot's down there trying to find the ledge that you remembered, right? And so as we're describing truths to people or ourselves, sometimes we just put a foot on a bunch of bullshit that was true in our mind for the predominant part of our history on this planet that we have since rejected. The interesting thing is that because the population, I know that a bunch of you have discovered this, because the population is so indoctrinated into all this stuff, that when you try to talk about reality, you are rejecting so many paradigms of their belief system that they immediately think you're nuts. What do you mean dinosaurs? Oh my gosh, what's next? And then, of course, you have some theories about like lizard people and that kind of stuff, which is just beautifully inserted to make sure that if you say that, you are compromised for life with those people. Again, that's another Bigfoot thing. No evidence of any kind, keeps coming up all the time. What's interesting, though, I wanted to mention before I forget, and I forgot the last couple of times I've talked about this. I think I've told you guys that I've been having fun with this service called Rift Tracks, which used to be the Mystery Science 3000 guys. They've got a new franchise they've had for several years now, like 10 years at least. And they make fun of movies while you watch them. But instead of having someone, the robot and the two robots and the dude in front of the freaking picture, they're just talking over it, which is a much better format. Here's what's interesting. I'm seeing just a ton of old movies that I didn't know existed. I mean, Chuck Norris movies I never knew he was in. All kinds of, Count Dooku and Tarkin and movie after movie after movie together. It's just phenomenal. But I'm watching a movie, which name escapes me at the moment, but it was, I'll find out. Let's see. This movie called The Horror Express. It's not a great movie. It's okay. They spent some money on it back in the day. But in this movie, it's about a guy who grabs an artifact. Count Dooku brings this artifact of this kind of ape-like being on a train. He's trying to get from point A to point B, and everybody just won't leave his ass alone about this thing. They want to open his crate all the time, open the crate. And that's how the story begins. But anyway, in this film, which is probably in the 70s somewhere, they just keep talking about paleontology. Over and over and over. And I've seen half a dozen films watching riff tracks where built into these scripts, because you're wondering why these movies are ever made. It's like they're just B-movies to the nines. Man, I love B-movies, trust me. But you're wondering how they got funding. And there's two themes I've seen in films, especially the ones in Europe. The ones in Europe will have a lot of demonic crap in them. And they're portraying it in the film as being bad demonic stuff, right? But as soon as it gets into the 70s or the 80s, that demonic stuff from Europe comes to the United States, and anyone can get a little thriller made. There's one with Ron Howard's brother about an ice cream truck. I mean, it's just so gnarly gross. It would give any kid like a psychosis for their life, depending on how old they were when they saw it. But the dinosaur thing's pushed. The fact that evolution potentially could be completely incorrect. Again, why would monkeys still exist if humans exist today? If you have the gene sequence to evolve, then at some point we got one bird, one dog, one bear, one humanoid. The fact that according to anthropologists, humans and apes and monkeys, we don't share any bones, really. Because if you simply go, well, look, it's got a rib cage. We got a rib cage. Well, a dog has a rib cage. Cats have rib cages. Fish have rib cages. You can't just say that we're identical. I know they can sound profoundly stupid if you haven't gotten off the train yet. But as soon as you start looking at the fact that the missing link, according to their own theories, 150 million years, and suddenly the Homo sapien arrives out of nowhere with a completely different redesigned nasal canal so that we can speak syllables, bigger brain cavity, and we just suddenly dominate this place. There's alien theory in there. There's potentially just creationism from a creator. But these cities are phenomenal. The other thing that's very interesting is with these cities comes more architecture around them. The sewage systems, irrigation systems, roads. Roads were very interesting because for thousands and thousands of years, roads were simply areas in the world where the vegetation was cleared. And then all of a sudden, society said, wow, where that rock is, vegetation doesn't grow. So let's experiment here. Let's put some more rocks on the ground to block vegetation growing. And then the vegetation grows between the rocks. How do we get this stacked up in a way that no vegetation can make it through? And that's where you get currently, the best evidence we have are the roads from Rome, where you have sedimentary stone that's very level, very amazingly interlocked, no mortar of any kind, and then on top of that, you have another rock, and on top of that, you have another rock. If there was to be, legions marching on these things, or horse and buggy going over them, they're deeper and they're thicker. That way they don't move, and no vegetation grows through them. And they last for a very, very long time because the sedimentary stones beneath them hold them in place, just like the plateau and the Giza Strip. But isn't it interesting that we have pyramids all over the place, and they're starting to become more and more evident? Now, it doesn't mean that pyramids can't be used to create false evidence, because I think that there's some Asian cultures that have done it. I think most definitely Europeans have done it. The cave paintings in France are discovered the second that evolution theory is launched. All of a sudden, we start discovering all kinds of ancient this and ancient that. And it would seem, if you compare all of the cave sketches and outdoor, I forgot what they call it. There's a name for the way that they create these sketches. But you can go in South America and you can go in Europe, and it seems like the same artist is drawing the same sort of animal all over the place. That's a little weird. But yeah, you've got, the soldiers underneath the pyramid in China. And we're to believe that all these were made, all of them completely unique. And now, that was believable, but once we got into the other more recent artifacts, it starts to look really silly. Things that look like cartoons have been made into sculptures. Plus, they don't match any of the sculptures that we have found anywhere else in the native history over there. They seem to be purposely created to look old, but they also lack any ornateness that most definitely existed in their culture. Because you'll have a Buddha carved into the side of a mountain that is just as amazing as the statues in Egypt for the pre-dynastics. And then all of a sudden they have these sort of cartoon Gumby things that they've discovered. They are trying to write, in my opinion, a false past because they saw how the West did it. Right? They saw Stonehenge get rebuilt in 54 and then blessed by some crazy banker druids as it being their possession. And even though that looks ridiculous, it's propaganda, and the CCP lives 100% in propaganda as far as we know. And I'm not trying to pick on any one particular culture. China's a very interesting thing because they're the latest one, I should say, to go through this whole thing. They have their fake space station underwater facility. They have fake rovers on the moon with brown soil and snow in the shots, right? Until NASA officials come over and say, what the hell are you doing publishing photographs of the moon that don't look anything like our photographs of the moon? For free, we'll flip those things into ash. And sure enough, the initial photographs turn white. It's a beautiful thing when you get to see it. That's one thing 45's got a huge problem with, because they are dealing with the fact that they put together so much propaganda that they have to somehow back out of it. So let me throw this at you towards the end here. Are we doing this because we have to? Because to live in a complete level of uncertainty drives man crazy. And we haven't seen that happen in our lifetime because we're so indoctrinated by belief systems that we can latch onto. I mean, just think about it, how many different systems you can latch onto. You can have full belief in astral projection, full belief in Christianity, Buddhism, Native American lore, all these different belief systems. What could Earth be? Well, currently we've got heliocentric, we've got flat Earth, we've got some ancient flat Earths that believe it's turtles all the way down. We got flat Earth thinks it's a contact on a giant globe. I mean, the options are just insane. And to take a position of how stupid everyone is for believing in something different than you believe in, yikes. My only criticism is take it into stride that what you have seen to date indicates more of a particular belief system than another. Just be careful with thinking it's one way or the other. Imagine you're in Westworld. It's kind of Westworld and Matrix mixed together. You paid to be here. The reason why what happens to you isn't as egregious as all the crazy crap that you see other people experience because they're NPCs to give you drama so that you as a hero can make decisions under pressure to prove out your soul. So if you just think you're on a contact floating in space, you're going to give up on the rest of what you paid for. If you say, okay, it seems like I'm in a simulation, which is really why there's a lot of theories of the continent shifting and expanding Earth making complete sense. I mean, there's no doubt, even if we're in a disk, they built all the continents to completely come together as a ball. That's just a fact, man. But it could be that it's not one, which means you're in a matrix. Someone is building just an artificial reality. Shit, man, this could be a computer. A quantum computer, right? Well, if you are just hell-bent on a very primitive theory, then the problem is you're going to miss the boat, right? It's like you're playing Fallout 17 and the world's like, it's going to take you 1,000 years just to walk into every area once, but you're just sitting in the coffee shop because you're so sure that the world is just a coffee shop, And if you're like me, it's fun. It's fun to see this stuff and have your mind blown. Now, one of the other theories that's bouncing around I want to share, because it's kind of going hand in hand with this architectural stuff, is there's a gentleman out there, God bless him, he keeps showing you photographs of mountains and rocks that look like either people or animals. And just like no forest on flat Earth, which fails to describe where all the branches are, right? These tempered former volcanoes that happen to organically, because again, there's one book of physics in the universe, they organically kind of look like tree stumps, Devil's Tower being one of them. It's because the world expanded and the surface of the Earth used to be up there where the volcano at Devil's Tower was. How do you think you get all those rocks in Arizona where the plateau is up really, really high? Because that's where the top of the Earth used to be, okay? As something rips apart, it falls into the rip, and we get lower Earth. How do you think oceans exist? It's because it's the brand new soil down there, up to 7.5 miles further down than where we are. And because of chemistry and the way that ethereal winds turn into hydrogen and oxygen and those bond, we get water. But anyway, he's showing all these pictures and suggesting that every single rock that's photographed from a particular angle, right, is a former being that died and just kind of sat there, like fallen angels or something, right? Never mind the fact that you can see the sedimentary rock that was that's basically making up their being, right? Never mind the fact that when photographed from a different angle, most of those pictures turn into nothing. And then the other one where it's a very small rock, and you can definitely see man-made chisels pushing in more eye sockets, noses, mouths, all that stuff, right? Now, some rocks will simply look like other things because there are physics involved, right? Which is, and I don't mean like the crappy physics that, Einstein lied about, the good stuff, right? But there'll be a rock, and I know one in Colorado at least that's very famous, looks like a phallus. Like a man's junk, right? Well, what's interesting about it is that was just a sedimentary thing that ended up occurring. Slightly heavier stone at the top, weaker stone down below. Could have been floods went by, the lower part, maybe one part smaller, one part bigger. And that could be the very physics that make up the way that the human genetics currently operate. Just one was made out of stone and the other one's made out of organic material. We know plants that look a lot like the male phallus. It's just physics. It's just the way that the sacred geometry, golden mean, Fibonacci pattern pushes through certain materials, right? So for my money, currently, if you want to suggest that a mountain that kind of looks like a face, okay, if that's not something that humans simply saw and said, oh my gosh, that really does kind of look like a face, let's get over there and knock that one little bit off right there so we complete the illusion, right? A lot of times the mouth is inserted, right? But if that's supposed to be a human, well, that means that the rib cage, the shoulders, the bones, all that stuff, connected to the other bone, that should be down inside the ground. 100%. There's a couple that look like, alligators or dragons lying on the ground. And what's funny is a friend of mine who's really smart and believes a lot of very, I think, excruciatingly researched things, has jumped off on this like he doesn't have a brain anymore. Unbelievable. Like he needs to believe in this. And I don't get it. For me, the need to believe in something means that you're either completely lost in the world at that moment in time, or you need some sort of savior. When those rocks were likened to just rocks, not so much, right? The belief system in them were not so heavy. But when someone said they're angels, that's when his eyes just blew up, like he needs a celestial thing. And he's not even natively raised Christian at all. But it's like as the world starts to freak the guy out, I think he's just saying, oh yeah, let's just say we believe in angels and maybe that'll make them exist. Now, I'm not saying angels don't exist at all. I'm just saying that them being rocks is kind of disabling, right? Well, if those are angels, man, then their body parts are all over the freaking world. And why is it always just their head, right? Let's excavate and find the rest of their body. Oh, not so much. Oh, gosh. And the thing is, if you disproportionately look at the size of the head and then multiply that, times 7, then you've got, quarter of a mile on the ground, half a mile on the ground. That's the problem with no forest on flat Earth. These are clever sometimes. I think the no forest one was super clever. This one that tries to suggest that rocks were living beings, I just think that's just as dumb gets. I mean, personally, put some more thought in it, bro. But these buildings all over the world, patinaed, falling apart, just as soon as they're photographed. Okay, you might be able to say, okay, well, maybe the materials in Brazil, in Argentina, what have you, in Shanghai, if we can notice in the photographs just the wear and tear on them, maybe we didn't really have the level of materials and tool craftsmanship that we needed to make it really last, and so a couple of them fall apart. But one, why would they ever tear these things down, right? There's that gambling city in, I think it's on an island off the coast of China. It's in China. It's China's property. And they went and built back facades of some of these buildings. European buildings. Well, it's 99.9% Chinese people there. By the way, I think it's utterly hilarious that all the Western cultures are so guilt-tripped incessantly about taking in refugees and making sure that every other person counted as a different race. And then in China, it's like none of that exists, right? There's some Arabs out west. They're in a concentration camp. But you don't have people in those countries. I mean, you got less than a percent of anyone who's not native. But they're the angels of the universe, right? Double standards. So I think we've got some explaining to do. This is still a very evolving area of research. We're looking for more smoking guns. There is a lack of a combined theory as of right now. So they'll say, look at this, look at that. I mean, one of the silly things is they'll have like, this has been going on for about 3 or 4 years. They'll take a picture of one of these buildings, or cities actually, and they're not suggesting that these are out of place in any shape or form for what I'm about to talk about, but there'll be no one on the streets when the photograph's taken. And people are like, where is everybody? There must be a mud flood reset. Where is everybody? It's like, okay, have you ever seen like a new area of town get built? And during construction, you're not allowed to go in that area unless you're part of the construction. And you don't think that when a photographer sets up a camera to take a shot, that they don't have the right and the capability of saying, stay the hell back. He's taking a photograph. This is for the bankers who paid for it. This is for the prospective buyers of the building or whatever. There is no mystery as to why those photographs exist. It's just, for me, it's just a really illogical deduction. So again, I say that if you just lay off, birds don't exist theories, you're going to really spend your time asking the universe the right questions to get the answer back that something really miraculous is happening. Because it is, and it's already happened. But don't forget that you're the next stage. The idea is that we believe that miracles happen in the past, or really bizarre things happen in the past, and that right now it's not going to happen again. Most of you know that Klaus Schwab wrote a book about resetting the world. And it's important to understand that that dude is not just the only guy that wants to do it. He's just a weird lingerie bunny beach crawling piece of shit who is representing them. And then you have the crazy inbred Bill Gates who just who knows what he is, knows he's a complete fucking fraud. And so when you are a fraud from the very, very beginning, what do you care? You reset the world. You're going to get rid of everyone who knows you're a fraud. So the more that these individuals hate the mirror, they want us all gone. So don't forget that researching this kind of stuff from the past is going to give us potentially, again, motive and actual psychological existence in those time frames is potentially something we'll never get back, right? But if one of you can autistically figure out one thing that just pulls that thread that we couldn't find, everyone's looking at the sweater, no one can find the thread, and you're the person to do it. Something about your background, something about your connection in the universe. It's like Steve Jobs said, a great idea is like catching a butterfly. It's hard to catch, and then after you catch it, it is very delicate until it is nurtured into something bigger. Anyway, I think that's about all I've got on this one for now. We will come back for absolute sure. Sorry about the slowdown in episodes. Again, I have to say it's been so windy in California. The weather manipulation has been off the chain. In addition to people actually admitting weather manipulation all around the world. There's a bunch of truth being dropped right now that I've never seen drop in my 17 years of being awake. So it's pretty cool. But I'm going to try and lock down a few more here in friends' backyards and what have you. I didn't realize how much stuff I got to carry around to get one of these things done. But anyway, for those of you hanging on, thank you so much. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. It's where you have the audio, the video, the social media. Almost all of them are independent. We are putting a lot of fun stuff on Facebook, our locked Facebook page. So your employer can't see what you're doing, right? But we have a store on All New Remastered Season 1. And for those of you who have been contributing on either PayPal or Patreon, I appreciate you so much. I know it's tough to give up $1 and then only get a couple episodes in a month. I'm going to be changing that drastically, and I am pining for a bunch of different episodes, so we got some good stuff coming. All right, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.